Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The day I first saw her, the air in town felt different, thick with heat, dust, and judgment. I had ridden in only to buy supplies and head right back to my grazing fields, but the crowd gathered near the trading post pulled my attention like a rope. People stood in a loose circle, whispering, gawking, pointing. And in the middle of it was her. She was taller than anyone there, taller than most men I'd ever met, broad-shouldered, steady-legged, and built with the kind of natural strength that made folks step back even when she wasn't moving. But what struck me had nothing to do with size. It was her stillness. A stillness that came from someone who had learned not to react even when the world prodded her like a spectacle. Her hands were bound loosely with rope, not tight enough to hurt, just enough to control, and her dark hair fell around her shoulders in heavy, wind-tangled waves. There was something noble in the way she held her head, something proud. But even from a distance, I could see her fingers trembling. Just slightly. Just enough to betray that she wasn't made of stone after all. The men around her were arguing about what to do with her, as though she wasn't standing right there hearing every word. Some claimed she was too much woman for any ranch, others that she ate like two hands put together. A few said she'd been abandoned by traders who didn't want to deal with her anymore. They talked about her strength like it was a curse, her presence like it was a burden. And she listened without speaking. Not because she agreed, but because she had learned that interruptions only made things worse. I should have walked away. I didn't know her, and I'd never been the type to jump into other people's trouble. But the moment she lifted her eyes and looked past the men, just a quick flicker of her gaze, just enough for her dark eyes to meet mine, something in my chest pulled tight. Her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was tired. Bone-deep tired in a way I recognized far too well. Someone had taken her spirit and pushed it up against its limits. Someone had spent a long time making her believe she took up too much space in a world that had no space for her anyway. And I felt a strange, steady warmth move up my spine, a protective instinct I didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. She was not dangerous. Not wild. Not what they said. She was simply alone. When one of the traders yanked her forward like an object they were trying to sell or give away, she flinched, not from pain, but from humiliation. That was the moment I stepped closer through the crowd, slowly, deliberately, not sure what I'd do yet but knowing I couldn't stand still. I didn't speak to her. Not yet. But I stood where she could see me, where she knew at least one pair of eyes wasn't filled with mockery. And for the first time all day, her trembling stopped. After the crowd lost interest and drifted away, she was left standing alone near the corral fence. The ropes around her wrists had been loosened, almost as if the men hadn't decided what to do with her and simply walked off. The rest of town returned to its chatter and chores as if she weren't even there anymore. But she was there, still, tall, unmoving except for the wind stirring her hair. And the moment the last loud voice faded, she seemed to fold inward just a little, like the tension that had kept her upright was draining out of her legs. Not collapsing, just weary. A kind of weariness that belonged to someone who'd carried too much for too long. I stayed where I was for a moment, trying to work out whether approaching her was the right thing to do. I didn't want to frighten her. I didn't want to look like another man with opinions about what she should be, where she should go, or who she should belong to. She had endured enough of that in just the last 20 minutes. But she looked so profoundly alone. Not just standing alone, feeling alone. I walked toward her slowly, keeping my steps soft over the dry dirt. Her posture straightened slightly when she noticed movement, though she didn't turn her head. Her gaze stayed anchored somewhere ahead, as if bracing for more judgment. I stopped a few feet away, giving her space. Close enough to speak, far enough not to crowd. "You all right?" I asked quietly. She didn't respond. For a heartbeat I thought maybe she couldn't speak English, or maybe she just didn't trust her voice not to shake. I tried again, gentler. "Can I bring you some water?" This time she moved. A small thing, her eyes shifting toward me, dark and cautious. There was no hatred in them, no defensiveness. What I saw instead was calculation, and exhaustion. She was trying to decide if I was another man who would take something from her, or someone who meant no harm. When she didn't answer, I took the risk of stepping toward the trough nearby. I filled a clean tin cup from the small pump. The metal was warm in my hand from the sunlight. Walking back to her, I held it out at arm's length. "No trouble," I murmured. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the cup, then to my hand, then to my face. Slowly, like every movement required trust she wasn't sure she had, she lifted her wrists. The rope slipped down, revealing faint marks on her skin. Not bruises, just the imprint of restraint. She reached for the cup. Her fingertips brushed mine. Only for a second, but enough to feel the warmth of her skin, steady, surprisingly soft. The brief contact made something tighten deep in my chest, like a string pulling taut. Her reaction was even more subtle, her breath caught, barely audible, but there. She drank carefully, controlled, almost grateful in a quiet way she refused to show on her face. When she handed the cup back, she held it a moment longer than necessary, as if she didn't want to let go too quickly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice low, rough-edged, but undeniably human and gentle. It was the first thing she'd said to me. And it landed with the weight of a beginning neither of us quite understood yet. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. Dark clouds gathered over the ridge and dropped low like a curtain falling at the end of a show. The wind picked up, pushing dust down the street in spirals. People hurried indoors. Doors slammed. Horses tugged nervously at their ties. She stood frozen for a moment, looking up at the sky as if deciding whether to walk into the storm or stay and face the people instead. Neither choice seemed kind. "Come on," I said softly, gesturing toward the old barn behind the blacksmith's shop. "It'll hit hard. Shelter's better than standing in it." She didn't follow immediately. There was a hesitation in her, like she wasn't used to anyone offering safety. Or maybe she feared what following a stranger might mean. But another crack of thunder split the sky, and the wind shoved against both of us. She nodded once. We jogged to the barn, the first drops of rain landing like cold taps on our skin. I pushed the door open and stepped inside first so she wouldn't feel trapped. She paused at the entrance, watching me, checking the corners with a careful gaze before stepping in after me. The storm hit full force then, rain pounding the roof, wind howling through the boards. Inside, the barn was dim, lit only by thin shafts of light slipping through cracks. Old hay lay piled in the corners, and the air smelled faintly of wood, dust, and memories. She wrapped her arms around her body, trying to chase off a shiver. Even someone as strong as her wasn't immune to cold. Her hair, damp from the short run, clung to her shoulders. "You're freezing," I murmured. "No, I'm fine," she said quickly, though her voice contradicted her. I took off my coat, thick, worn, and still warm, and held it out. When she didn't move, I stepped closer, slow enough that she could stop me if she wanted. She didn't. Instead, she lowered her eyes as if unsure whether she was allowed to accept kindness. "Here," I said gently. "It's just a coat." Her lips pressed together in a conflicted line before she finally let out a quiet breath and took it. When her hands brushed mine, her fingers were colder than I expected. She pulled the coat around her shoulders, the fabric swallowing her frame in a way that made her look less intimidating and more human. Vulnerable, even. She sat on a low hay bale, her posture stiff at first. I sat a few feet away, giving her space. The barn felt sheltered, like the outside world couldn't reach us here. Not the storm, and not the judgments she'd endured. "I didn't mean to cause trouble today," she said after a long silence. Her voice trembled just slightly. "Sometimes people see me and they think I'm something to fear." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "You didn't cause anything." They reacted to who they think you are, not who you actually are. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes, deep and searching, softened for the first time. As if she wanted to believe me but had forgotten how to trust. The storm boomed overhead, but inside the barn, a quieter kind of thunder rolled between us, recognition, and the beginning of something neither of us knew how to name yet. The storm didn't ease, it only grew louder, pressing the two of us deeper into the barn's quiet shadows. The wind rattled the wooden panels like fists knocking to be let in. But inside, the air felt still, warm, suspended, almost protective. She sat with my coat pulled tightly around her, her long legs drawn slightly inward, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. I'd never seen someone so physically strong look so emotionally fragile. For a long while, neither of us spoke. And somehow, the silence wasn't heavy, it was honest. Like we were both catching our breath after a day that had taken too much from us. Finally, she exhaled, long and uneven. "You spoke to me," she murmured, eyes fixed on the floor. "Everyone else only judged." Her voice cracked at the last word, barely noticeable, but it hit me like a weight. "I spoke because you deserved it," I said quietly. "Anyone would see that if they bothered to look past the surface." Her fingers tightened on the fabric of my coat. "Most don't look past anything. Not with me." She didn't sound bitter. She sounded used to disappointment. She shifted a little, the hay rustling under her. The barn's dim light outlined her profile, the high cheekbones, the strong jaw, the way her expression softened when she wasn't trying to look unbothered. Rain trickled down the roof in rhythmic patterns, almost like a heartbeat syncing with our quiet conversation. "People think I don't feel things," she continued. "That I'm too big, too loud, too wrong in the ways a woman shouldn't be wrong. They think I'm made for work, not for life." The word life caught in her throat. I leaned slightly closer, not enough to crowd her, just enough for her to know she wasn't speaking into emptiness. "Strength doesn't cancel out softness," I said. "And you're not wrong. You're just different from what they understand." She looked up, and for a moment, her eyes met mine with raw, open vulnerability, like she was letting me see the truth she kept hidden beneath her proud posture. "What about you?" she asked softly. "What do people see in you?" I gave a small, humorless laugh. "Mostly nothing. I'm the quiet one. The one folks look past. The one who works, listens, keeps things steady, but doesn't shine bright enough to be noticed." She studied me with a searching gaze. It wasn't the wary assessment she'd given earlier, it was a gentle, almost curious examination, as if recognizing a familiar loneliness in me. "You notice people," she said. "That is a kind of strength." Her words warmed something in my chest I didn't know needed warming. Lightning flashed, illuminating her features briefly, and in that moment I saw it clearly, not a giantess, not an outsider, not someone defined by her size or strength. I saw a woman, tired, brave, hurting quietly, but still holding herself together with a dignity most people couldn't see. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand lightly on her forearm. Just a simple touch. Steady. Gentle. Asking nothing. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lowered her head and let her eyes close, just for a second, as if the contact itself gave her a small piece of peace she hadn't felt in years. In the quiet of that barn, with the storm raging outside, two lonely people found a moment of shared understanding, fragile yet powerful, like the first spark of a fire neither of us meant to start. Morning crept in quietly, like it didn't want to disturb us. The storm had passed some time before dawn, leaving the barn washed in soft, gray light that filtered through the cracks in the walls. I had drifted into light sleep sitting up against a post, and she had eventually rested too, wrapped in my coat, leaning slightly to the side, her posture finally relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. For the first time since meeting her, she looked peaceful. Human. Free of the weight she carried. But peace never lasted long in towns like ours. The faint tremor of hooves reached us before the voices did. She stiffened instantly, awakening in a single sharp breath. Her eyes opened wide, and the clarity in them told me she recognized the sound. "They came back," she whispered. I didn't ask who they were. The dread in her voice told me enough. I stood up, scanning through a thin gap in the boards. 3 riders approached the barn from the road, men from the day before. Their horses blew out puffs of white breath in the cold morning air. The men rode with the confidence of people who believed they had every right to take whatever, or whoever, they wanted. Her breathing grew shallow. "They'll bring me back," she murmured. "People like them don't let things go." Something inside me tightened. I'd spent most of my life avoiding trouble, avoiding confrontation, avoiding the kind of bold stands that turned a quiet man into a target. But seeing her shrinking into herself, shoulders curled inward, eyes pleading silently for something she didn't dare ask, it pushed me into a version of myself I'd never met before. "They're not taking you," I said. The words weren't loud, but they were steady, so steady they surprised even me. She looked at me as if trying to decide whether to believe it. Whether I was saying it for her, or for myself. The riders dismounted, boots hitting the ground with heavy thuds. One of them shouted toward the barn, voice echoing. "We know she's in there. That Apache woman belongs with us, bring her out." She flinched at the word, belongs. I stepped instinctively between her and the door. When the barn doors swung open, sunlight spilled inside, along with the silhouettes of the men. They paused when they saw me standing there, just one man blocking their path. "Move aside," the leader growled. "We're taking her back." I felt her behind me, her breath, her fear, the trembling she tried so hard to hide. Without thinking, I reached back and found her hand. Her fingers closed around mine instantly, as if she'd been reaching out halfway already. My voice didn't shake when I answered. "No. She's not going anywhere with you." The men exchanged looks, surprised, annoyed, incredulous. "What's she to you?" one spat. I didn't have a practiced answer. Just the truth that rose up in my chest like a shield. Someone worth protecting. A long silence followed, tension thick enough to choke on. The men, unwilling to fight in daylight in the middle of town, eventually spat curses into the dirt, mounted their horses, and rode off with the promise that they'd be back. When they were gone, I turned to her. She still held my hand. Still trembling. Still trying to breathe. But when her eyes met mine, something new flickered there, not fear, trust. A fragile trust, yes. But real. In that moment, we were no longer strangers making do with shared shelter. We were 2 people standing together against the world, whether either of us understood it yet or not. We left town before the sun had fully risen, while the sky was still streaked with pale lavender and fading storm clouds. The air smelled clean, washed new by the rain. I saddled my horse quickly, glancing toward the road every few seconds in case the riders returned earlier than expected. She stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself, my coat still draped over her shoulders like a fragile shield. When I lifted myself onto the horse, I held out my hand to her. "Come on. It's safer if we move now." She hesitated, not out of mistrust, but out of uncertainty. As though she wasn't used to taking help freely offered. But then she stepped closer, placing her hand in mine. Her grip was warm, strong, but trembling faintly. I pulled her up behind me, feeling her weight settle carefully, respectfully, as if she feared burdening me. Her arms circled my waist slowly, cautiously, until they rested just lightly enough that she was touching me but still giving me room to breathe. The contact sent a quiet warmth through my chest, a steady pulse of awareness I pretended not to notice. "Hold on," I said. She tightened her grip, not too hard, just firm, grounding. The kind of hold someone gives when they are trusting you with more than their balance. We rode out of town and into the open plains, where the world widened into endless fields, rolling hills, and the soft whisper of wind brushing over the grass. The storm had left puddles scattered across the dirt path, each one reflecting a sliver of morning light. Her breath warmed the back of my neck, steady and close, and every time the horse shifted, her chest brushed lightly against my back, a gentle reminder that she was there, real, trusting, choosing to stay close. After an hour of riding, we stopped by a secluded creek. Water rushed gently over smooth stones, sparkling in the sunrise. Birds flicked through the branches above, shaking droplets onto the ground like tiny beads of glass. She slid off the horse and stood by the water, gazing across the landscape with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, soft, almost peaceful. Like the vastness of the plains gave her room to breathe. "You brought me far," she said. "I wanted you safe," I replied. She knelt beside the creek, dipping her hands into the cold water. The sunlight caught the droplets on her skin, turning them into small diamonds that ran along her fingers. For a moment, she looked young in a way she hadn't been allowed to be in a long time. I crouched nearby, close enough that we shared the same patch of quiet air but not close enough to intrude. She glanced at me, eyes warm yet questioning. "You risked a lot back there," she said softly. "For someone you don't know." I shook my head. "I know enough." Her gaze lingered on me, deep and searching, as if trying to understand what exactly I saw in her. After a long, careful breath, she reached out and placed her hand gently on my cheek. Her fingers were cool from the creek, but the touch was warm with meaning. "Thank you," she whispered. The world seemed to pause. Wind slowed. The creek softened. Even my heartbeat steadied, as if matching the calm in her voice. She leaned her forehead lightly against mine, just a simple, wordless connection, and for a few quiet seconds, we stayed like that, two people suspended in a rare moment of trust neither of us had ever been offered before. We stayed by the creek longer than planned, letting the quiet settle around us like a blanket. The morning light softened into warm gold, and for the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't bracing for footsteps, raised voices, or the sting of someone judging her before she'd spoken a single word. She was simply there, standing in sunlight, breathing calmly, existing freely. But peace wasn't enough. "Not yet. They'll come searching," she said eventually, her voice steady but thoughtful. "They won't forget what you did." I nodded. She wasn't wrong. Men like those riders didn't let go of their control easily. Still, I felt no regret. Only a certainty that the path we'd taken was the right one. "I have a small ranch out west," I said. "Quiet, tucked between two ridgelines. Nobody passes through unless they're lost." I paused, choosing my words with care. "You'd be safe there, if you wanted to come." Her eyes softened with something that looked like hope, but also caution, deep-rooted and familiar. "You don't know me," she murmured. "Not truly." I stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "I know enough to want you safe. I know enough to want you to choose your life, not have it chosen for you." I hesitated, then added, "And I know enough to want you there. With me." A quiet breath left her, half relief, half disbelief. She turned toward the water, letting the wind brush her hair across her shoulders, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke, voice low and trembling only at the edges. "I've never had a place of my own," she whispered. "Never had a life where I wasn't being moved, sold, judged. I don't know what I'd do in a life where I wasn't being controlled." Her throat tightened. "I don't know who I'd be." I stepped behind her, close enough that she could feel my warmth but still free to walk away if she wished. "Maybe that's something you can learn," I said. "Maybe that's something we can figure out, together." She turned, slowly, and her eyes found mine. There was something in them I hadn't seen before, not fear, not mistrust, not even hope. Something deeper. Something like a decision forming at the very center of her being. "You'd stay?" she asked. "Even if I'm not what people expect?" Even if I take up too much space, in every way. I lifted my hand and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her cheek. My fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary. You don't take up too much space, I said softly. You take up the space that was meant for you. And I want to be there in whatever part of that space you'll share. Her breath caught, a small, fragile sound, and then she stepped into me, resting her forehead against my shoulder. Not hiding. Not collapsing. Just leaning, allowing herself to trust someone fully for the first time. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her slowly relax into the embrace. Her hands slid up my back, her fingers curling into the fabric of my shirt. She wasn't trembling anymore. I'll come, she whispered. Not because I'm running, but because I'm choosing. The words felt like a promise she had never been allowed to give anyone before. We mounted the horse again, her arms wrapping around me with a quiet certainty this time. No hesitation. No fear. Just a woman deciding she belonged somewhere, and choosing me to be part of that place. As we rode toward the horizon, the world opened ahead of us, wide and golden, untouched by judgment or cruel hands. We didn't know what challenges waited. We didn't know what we'd become. But we knew we wouldn't be alone. And for the first time in both our lives, that was enough to build a future on.